ready?
I'm ready.
So, Jed, is bamboo a round pole or a square peg?
Why not both?
Why not both? Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Bamboo Podcast. I am very, very excited today because we have Jed Long with us. He is the founder, or should I say the co-founder with Where is One, Pablo? I haven't met him yet, but and his beautiful mom. So he is the co-founder of Cave Urban, which is a design and architecture firm based in Australia, which also does work internationally, and we're really excited to have him here in Bali. So welcome, Jed, and thanks for joining us today. It's a real pleasure and privilege to get to interview you on the Bamboo Podcast.
Amazing. Thanks, Aaron. Great to be here.
Yeah, so maybe we could start off just telling me and everybody who's listening a little bit about Cave Urban and what inspired you to get into bamboo, especially in a place like Australia where they're not, especially in the building industry, let's just say your regulatory requirements are much more intense than ours here.
That would be an understatement. Yeah, well, Cave Urban started a bit more than 10 years ago now. We came together very organically. At the time, I was just finishing my architecture degree. Mum had an architecture practice that she was running, and Juan Pablo, who's the other co-founder, had just arrived in Australia. And we had started doing this research project on the side out of interest about, traditional vernacular structures, and in particular, the lightweight architecture of Australia. So Indigenous Australians used to often live in a way where they would migrate. It was seasonal living, and each place they arrived, they would create shelter. And that shelter was made from the living land, the materials that they found around them. And that was a great inspiration for us. And Mum actually wanted to do a PhD on it, but couldn't really find the time between raising children and running a practice. And so thought instead that she would just run it as a research project on the side. And so basically we started just going and investigating things. And part of that was going to workshops. I had a scholarship that took me to Japan. I was doing work at a forestry school there. And on the way home, I saw a workshop in Thailand, in Chiang Mai, with Mark Emery and Bamboo Roo, and went to it. And so Nikki, my mum, and Juan Pablo came along, and we all went to this workshop. And that was one of the first times that we started to work with bamboo. And it was interesting. It was a material that we kind of were all interested in. We were happy to play around with it because there was some available in Australia, but we didn't really imagine it was going to go to, I guess, the places that it's gone. And
when was that?
That was 2012, around then. Probably a bit earlier, maybe 2010, 11. Because, it was 2010, and then in 2012, Lockie, who is my mum's partner and who's also part of Cave Urban, he and Juan Pablo put together a proposal for an art exhibition, Sculpture by the Sea in Sydney. And the work was called Mengenang, and it was actually the 10-year memorial for the Bali bombings. And so they came up with this work that was a field of 200 or so bird scarers, the ones that you will find in the fields here in Bali.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of them, but my son just discovered them.
Yeah.
He's 3. He's really into them.
And they're amazing because they have a propeller, and they turn in the wind, and they kind of have this talking sound, like dock, 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 and it was notionally to keep the birds away. And so we made all of these, and we put them on the headland in Bondi, and we tuned every single one of them so that we formed a D minor chord. And so what happened was, as you walked through this forest of these wind instruments, there was this incredible resonating sound. And it was a really pertinent work. It got the People's Choice at the event. We were invited then to go exhibit it a number of other times. And that was kind of a really fantastic piece of momentum. And from there, Cave Urban started to kind of just grow organically. And a big part of that was a festival called Woodford.
Yeah.
And with Woodford Festival, again, festivals are temporary objects. for maybe the month or two leading up. There's this incredible energy that goes into it, building it, and then everyone comes and they have their party, and then it goes and it disappears. And so part of our research into lightweight structures, bamboo suddenly became really interesting, because bamboo is this material that grows incredibly fast. So we could harvest poles that were 3 years old. There was a lot of bamboo around near Woodford. So we were going to an amazing farm at Crystal Waters that was being run, by one of the kind of members of the Australian Bamboo Society.
So you were harvesting, you had to do the whole process.
Whole process.
You had to harvest it yourself, split it yourself, and then can motivate a whole lot of people to build it basically for free.
Yes, pretty much.
Wow.
So I remember the first work we tried to create of size at Woodford, we were basically ringing people up trying to find people who had clumps of bamboo. And there was this one old farmer who said, yeah, I've got some bamboo, the cows love it, come down. And we turned up and it was this giant clump of balcoa. So balcoa is a very large woody bamboo. It hadn't been harvested for years. It was tangled up, and it took us probably an entire day to cut out maybe 5 poles. It was so bad. And I've got this great photo of Lockie up in the air, standing on a pole of bamboo, trying to cut it himself because it had been tangled up. And it was so hard. And so at that point we were like, maybe this is not right.
No chainsaw.
No chainsaw. No, you couldn't even use a chainsaw, because you would use a chainsaw and it was so heavy and it was so tangled that the chainsaw blades would jam. So even with the chainsaw, it was really hard. We broke so many blades. But then we got this call from this farm at Crystal Waters, Earth Care Farms, and they had the most incredible forest of moso. So moso is a running bamboo. They had one clump of moso, they had another of madake, and we turned up, and again, it was overgrown because no one had really been harvesting it, but we could get to it so much easier as a running bamboo because each pole's spaced apart. And so for years, we had this amazing relationship with them where we would come in and we would take some poles out of the forest. We would pay them, a small amount of money, which allowed us to be able to do it and gave them obviously something in return. And we brought that forest largely back to health because it went from being overgrown to having the correct spacing. It was really easy to get the poles. The poles grew much straighter. They came out of the ground at a much larger diameter because the forest was actually being cared for. And we got to work with moso and madake, which, again, as someone who has to harvest their own bamboo, is so much better to work with.
than the balcoa.
The balcoa, yeah.
It's interesting how sometimes, we assume that we're using the bamboo that is the strongest.
Yeah.
But actually, it's a lot of it has to do with whether you have somebody who's willing to harvest it or not.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think actually a really good lesson for us, because Australia has no bamboo industry. It's literally us just finding people who have forests and doing the harvesting ourselves. You learn a lot harvesting bamboo. You learn which species are really nice to work with and which species are absolute pains in the ass. And it goes for the whole way through. It goes with processing as well. So you cut down the pole. Okay, it's easier to pull certain species out. You're cleaning the branches off. Again, some, particularly clumping bamboos, tend to have these really hard to cut off, knobs of branches that kind of are really, when you do finally get them off, you're taking divots out of the bamboo unless you're doing it correctly. Whereas, with a machete and the right technique, it's, for us at least, it was much easier to clean up the running bamboo and then splitting it. So we do a lot of work weaving, and that again came from Woodford. It came from us because in the beginning we didn't know anything, and this is kind of our story, is that in Australia it was very hard to get information about bamboo, and the people we spoke to tended to keep it very close to the chest.
Yeah, it's like, you can't, I'm the bamboo.
Yeah, well, it's why I love Bamboo Ute, because it's like...
I'm the bamboo master.
Yeah, this information is only going to go places if we share it. And so we had heard about this incredible Taiwanese artist, Wang Wenqi, and he had been creating works all around the world. And in particular, he had just built a work at Shiroshima in Japan. And so Mum just emailed him, and he in return just out of the blue got this email from someone in Australia being like, hey, I want to build something out of bamboo. Amazingly, he replied, he said yes. And so he came at the end of 2012 to Woodford.
And helped you build...
And helped us build...
an installation there.
Yeah.
And just to give like me and also the listeners an idea, like how many people are working on these structures at Woodford?
So this one was huge. We had never worked at this scale before. And so I think that collaboration with Wang Wenqi really empowered us. And so we owe a lot to him. And so to get a sense of size, we built a structure that was 100 meters long. We used about 40 people. Wang Wenqi had a team of 6 or 7 Taiwanese craftspeople
who joined.
Yeah. And so they were teaching everybody else.
That's so cool.
It was amazing. It was amazing.
So cool. It's like a giant bamboo U.
Exactly. It was like that. So they couldn't really speak English. So they were speaking Mandarin. We found 2 volunteers who could speak Mandarin. They were our translators. Mei Wen, who is Wang Wenqi's wife, she was also translating. And so largely the communication was taking place through making. Wang Wenqi would do drawings, he would make models, and they became really important tools as part of this process for us to be able to communicate ideas. And so over a period of 3 weeks, we built this structure. It was, in the end, about 14, 15 meters high. And there was this main tower. The work was called Woven Sky. And at the end, because the whole time we were weaving this bamboo, and we had a scaffolding inside. And so at the very, very end of the project, we took the scaffolding down and suddenly had created this negative space, this internal space that was incredibly, I guess, governed by the bamboo, because it was all woven and the light was tracking across the sky, casting shadows into this kind of cupola, this tower form. And it was really spiritual. I had a similar feeling when I came to the Green School for the first time, actually.
And entered the heart of school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. Like you're stepping into these works that have a scale to them, but they also have a materiality to them. And that's something that I think you can get with bamboo that, I mean, you can get with other materials, but there's something very particular about the types of spaces when done right with bamboo and how incredible they feel. And this was one of them.
Yeah, there's a certain, it's like the material is helping to guide the form, right?
Yeah.
That's
entirely.
so beautiful.
Yeah.
And so I mean, you started with Woodford with bamboo, and then I know Cave Urban does lots of different things, but I know recently that you managed to get a pretty impressive installation in like the Melbourne or the Sydney
Biennale.
The Sydney Biennale, right?
Yeah.
And so what was the experience from going from kind of a very warm, welcoming festival vibe to like having to install a work of art in a very structured, much less flexible environment?
It's interesting because we did Woven Sky, and then the next year we got invited from that to do something for Brisbane Festival. And it was really confronting the first time, because up until then, it was festivals, it was small scale arts exhibitions. We were intentionally working in spaces where there wasn't regulation. And for us,
which is a great place to start, especially a place like Australia.
So, in Australia, it is very hard to build with bamboo. So art became a medium for us for exploration and experimentation. And so the first time that we found ourselves operating with budgets, with, site supervision, all this stuff, it was quite challenging. And I guess over the last 10 years, we've learned to operate in that environment a lot better. And so when we were invited to create a work for the Sydney Biennale, it was actually like really amazing because, again, it's kind of one of Australia's main artistic events. And it was kind of representing for us this journey where, we do work within a festival space because We love that idea of community and working with community. But then also we love exploring it within an artistic setting and talking to kind of larger thematic ideas. So the work for the Biennale, the whole exhibition, it was called Rivers, and it was about rivers. So it was looking at rivers as points of contestation, or these lines that define geography and countries, and also as ecological bodies. And we had been invited to work within a space called the Cutaway, which is in the middle of Sydney CBD. And it's a giant space. It's a couple of 100 meters long. It's almost 20 meters high. And they've built an artificial park over the top of it. So it's this big cavernous space.
It sounds like a warehouse. It's kind of...
Yeah, like a kind of cave meets a warehouse. So it's really cool. But the problem that people have always had in that space is it's too big. So the curator of the exhibition came to us and asked whether we could create something that would introduce scale to a space that big. So the work we came up with, Flow, was all about, in part, filling the space, bringing the scale of the space down to where you can appreciate work and it doesn't look small. And then also responding to all of the other artworks within the exhibition. So we actually created this big model on a table like the one that we're sitting at right now and placed each of the works in it. And Juan Pablo, who's the creative director for Cave Urban, he took all these bits of paper and we were kind of creating this model, and that was our way of working out in part what the form would be. Because when you would know this, when you're designing with bamboo, you can design with it on a computer, but it also is, as a natural material, is something that needs physical model making to kind of really understand
and to help you think through the design.
Exactly, and iterate. So we made this model, and then we came into the space, and again, over a period of a couple of weeks, we had a whole lot of volunteers come and work with us, and we built, a really large piece of work. This one was about 200 meters long, and the whole thing was suspended. So we harvested bamboo, again, this time from a farm near Sydney. It's like a Vietnamese family who grow the bamboo for the shoots, and then we come in and we harvest it.
You harvest the poles.
We harvest the poles because they don't need the poles. So it's really nice.
Fun fact about bamboo, that more bamboo is harvested for food than
exactly.
than poles.
There's
in
many
a
different
lot of contexts, many
different functions of bamboo. We harvested that, we built it, and then actually amazingly someone acquired the work afterwards, so we'll get to build it again soon.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
amazing.
Which is nice. But it's interesting, and so to your question of what is it like to work within the regulations, I think bamboo, has its genesis in countries like Bali or Colombia, or places where I guess creativity is not quite so burdened with bureaucratic restriction. And so Australia is a very different context to that. It's a place that has high labour costs. There's a lot of regulation around building. There's a lot of health and safety. And so some of the things that we try to do there come up against a lot of hurdles. And again, that's why we use art. So if we're talking...
Art is kind of your loophole.
Exactly. And temporary. So as long as you call something temporary...
Even if it's 5 years.
It's all about the time scale, right? Everything is impermanent. The Colosseum is impermanent. Just takes long enough to fall down. And so we say temporary work. And this is again where, for us, bamboo is relevant. So people will ask a question, why is bamboo relevant in Australia? And it probably won't be the same reasons as it is in Bali.
For sure, but you kind of demonstrated in what you mentioned that you literally revitalized a whole grove of bamboo for a festival. So bringing humans into that bamboo grove in a particular way that happened to be linked to basically a community act has an interesting effect where you notice that over the years you actually improved that forest. So it's really, really, really interesting. So I'm curious, started with Cave Urban, been to the big fancy design show in Sydney, and I know that you're working in Bali, and using bamboo not as a round pole in a different way. But before we get into that, it would be great to talk a little bit about your academic inquiry into bamboo, and I know that it's very linked to what it means to be human, based on and I think it'd be great to kind of look a little bit about what is it about bamboo that inspires you, and what's encouraged you, and what are the main questions you're trying to answer?
It's a good question. I think the starting point for a lot of that is community. And so because, again, Australia is a different setting than to Bali, the way that we've been able to build so much of our work is through community participation.
Yeah.
And, whether you call someone a volunteer or a student or, there's so many different ways of describing that process. But the idea for us is that we would not be able to make the works that we do without the help of people who are willing to come and work largely for free often.
Yeah, for the pleasure of the process.
Exactly.
It's interesting that we used to live in a time when, and this probably links to what you're going to talk about. I don't know for sure, but we live in a time where we've totally segregated or partitioned off the creative process of building homes, building our spaces. We used to, our great-grandparents probably were obliged to help their neighbor build their house.
Yeah,
right.
Like
in
the idea of
context.
Yeah, like the idea of a barn raising.
Barn raising in the West is here in Bali they say gotong royong, right? Everybody has to get together to help each other, and that's still active here. But Australia, it's been largely removed, but people still crave it.
Yeah, no,
they're doing it, and they're paying to go to a festival.
I can't tell you how much people crave it.
Yeah.
And Woodford is an amazing example of that. People come for a month, and we literally have people who are like nuclear physicists, or like high level finance, or people with really like doctors, like everyone who like. And that's not to say that that's not as valid as all the other people who are coming from other walks of life, but we have such a broad spectrum of people who come, and they're all coming for community. And that process of us spending a month together building is really amazing, and it creates this incredible bond with all these people, and you feel like family at the end of it.
Yeah.
For those who are listening who aren't aware, Woodford is in Queensland near Brisbane. And this happens in the middle of summer. So
how many people attend? It's
so
a music
over
festival.
the course of it, there's
we should
almost
clarify.
100,000 people who will come through the gate.
Oh, wow.
It's a big festival.
Yeah.
When, it's an empty site, by the time they finish, it's like the 40th largest town in Australia. So
wow.
There's like a whole town building. And also it's the middle of summer, so it's really hot. So everyone's coming and it's hot, and they're doing manual labor, and they're just working all day. And you would think they're crazy, but everyone has the best time. And so to come back to education, part of that process for us, because we're so grateful that people will come and do this with us, particularly outside of Woodford when we're doing a build like the Biennale or another event where there's not a 7-day music festival at the end to say thank you. Part of it is education.
Yeah.
And that process, and to kind of go back to it when we first started, we couldn't do that. And so when people come, we want to share that knowledge with people so that they do get an education in bamboo, similar to Bamboo U. And so people come, we teach them about the bamboo, how to harvest, when's the right time to harvest, how to work with the material. And we had to build in that educational element in part because it made us feel better about people coming and working with us, but also to upskill and to build a community in Australia. So we have this growing network of people who now have bamboo skills, who know about bamboo, who go off and do their own things. And that's part of our way of, I guess, trying to grow our own kind of nascent culture, our own little culture.
The bamboo village.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Our one Australian bamboo village.
Yeah, there you go.
And I mean, you're kind of referencing Arif Rabik here.
Yeah, we've done a podcast with him.
And Arif has actually come to Woodford and planted a bamboo forest there.
Oh, amazing.
So we have we do have a bamboo village at Woodford.
Yeah.
So that was the start of the education. And then teaching at university. And then COVID hit. And I had been running a program with the University of Tasmania. and a professor, one of the lecturers there, Helen Norrie, and we'd been taking students across to Vietnam, and we would spend a few weeks. We'd start at the bottom. So there's a woman, My Han Diep, who has a bamboo village just outside of Ho Chi Minh, but we end up in the north, and then we would go and build a cow shed or build some structure. So it was
for the community. Yeah.
And so that was really interesting. And from that, we were starting to kind of come up with this idea that we called Agritecture. So, combining the agrarian elements of growing material and then building with it. And that's something that bamboo is very connected with. You literally, Agritecture. You literally cut down a pole and you can straight away build with it. Obviously it will last longer if you do a few things in between.
But for a cow shed,
there was a very visceral link. We would go to a village. There was a clump of bamboo in a backyard. We cut that down, and a few days later, there's a cow shed.
Yeah.
And so that stopped with COVID. And I'd always played around with doing a PhD. And so COVID seemed like a good excuse to do a PhD.
Started,
yeah. I mean, my daughter was born a few months later, and suddenly it didn't seem like such a good idea. But for better or worse, for the last few years, I've been doing a PhD. And my interest is looking at how cultures like Australia that don't have a history of craft with bamboo can create their own culture of use. And so you have these different pockets of learning. You have Bali, maybe Vietnam, Colombia, parts of Africa. These places that have bamboo cultures. And these bamboo cultures have all evolved in different ways, but there's thematic links. And actually, in the last 50 years, they all start to interconnect. So each little silo of information has begun to overlap more and more as Yorkshire ventures out of South America and turns up in Bali.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Or, people in Europe, Fry Otto back in the 80s, is writing about information that then gets turned into structures. Or Indonesia starts to create the style here at the Green School that then starts to pop up all around the world.
Or Arif goes to Woodford.
Or Arif goes to Woodford.
Or you come to Bali.
Or I come to Bali. And so there's this really interesting intermeshing. And you start to see these different ideas, and you can trace back the genesis of all these ideas, and you start to see how they interlink. The mortar reinforced joint that Oscar Hidalgo Lopez and Simon Velez developed becomes such a critical thing now for being able to achieve the scale of bamboo buildings that we're seeing. And so it's really interesting to see the evolution of knowledge with bamboo, but then also taking it a step further and going, okay, so then how is bamboo relevant in a place like Australia or Europe or America? And it might not be to build a green school, because obviously the technology, the knowledge, the overarching cultural conditions that enables the building of the Ark, for instance, might not be possible somewhere else.
Yeah, but I think there's something beautiful about that, because it's so important to have our buildings not just be a homogeneous sprawl of efficiency, but become more of an expression of place, right?
Exactly. And that is 100% it. So how do you express the context of place with the bamboo, especially with bamboo? And this applies to architecture. Globalization, modernism have seen this kind of homogenization of architectural expression. And that's made possible because materials are largely plastic in the sense that you can make them do whatever you want. Concrete can be poured into whatever form, and it sets, and it's creating that form. Steel, similar, you can be used to build whatever you want, but as a result, in any place, you can build with it in the same way. Bamboo's not like that. And returning to your original question, round pole, square peg, I think the beauty of bamboo is actually the fact that you can use it in many different ways. And it's largely dependent upon context. And so context becomes this really interesting thing that I'm interested in exploring. So in a place like Australia, what are the contextual limitations upon bamboo? We don't build a multi-story building with it, but actually maybe it's really relevant for temporary architecture, or it's really relevant for community participation.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't have to compete. It can just exist as kind of another expression.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be an or. It can be an and.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, I'm realizing as we're talking that there's a kind of an irony in you being in Bali right now.
Yeah.
Because you started with round bamboo in Australia.
Yeah.
Now you're working on square bamboo in Bali.
Yeah.
Because you're recognizing that if you want to bring it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're recognizing that if you want to bring it to Australia in a way outside of the festival context, you kind of need it square.
Exactly.
But you've come to Bali to help do that.
The same reasons the Bali's created the Green School. You can do things here.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about, what are you up to here?
Yeah, so Arif Rabik, who runs Indobamboo, and I have been working together for years now. He's come out to Woodford. We've done various different projects around the place. And what's happened is basically we've both gotten to a point where we're interested in laminate bamboo. The reason being is that I still love working with round pole. I still love it for all the things you can do. But I think there's a larger pressing concern when we start to talk about the ecological consequences of the built environment. So, we know how much of a proportion that the built industry contributes to global emissions.
It's quite high.
It's very high.
40%?
Well, depends what metric is. Someone might say 16%. Someone might say, we're talking about energy consumption.
It's over 10.
I'm not going to quote a number. It's over 10. That's big enough.
Yeah.
If you think about those global issues, they're largely urban issues. So you have growing urban populations, which require shelter because that's a basic human right. And also there's commercial impacts. People want a nice new building all the time. And so the outcome of that is more and more construction using materials like concrete and steel that aren't necessarily renewable,
Yeah, and even the ones that are abundant that aren't renewable are still being taxed.
Exactly.
Like sand.
Like sand, exactly. There's so many... this is human nature. Everything we do has consequence. You can use even bamboo, right? So bamboo is notionally renewable and good for the environment, but only if it's cultivated in the right way, harvested properly, treated so it lasts and doesn't just fall apart. And the people who are growing it are paid properly so that they don't cut down their bamboo crop and plant a palm oil crop or tobacco field. So there's a whole value chain that's actually required. And that's really what I'm working with Arif with. So Arif has this bamboo village model that's all about, kind of starting at a village level co-op, growing the bamboo, semi-processing it, shipping it to a manufacturer. And so in this instance, we're working together at Indobamboo, and we're looking at how do we process bamboo into a material that can be used in urban construction.
In Australia,
in Indonesia, in Bali.
Yeah.
I go down the street in Bali and I see so many 3 to 4 story concrete buildings, sometimes unfinished concrete buildings, but the de facto material is concrete. And these aren't very exciting architecturally, but they're the bulk of the world's building consumption. How do we introduce renewable materials into situations like that? Not quite as sexy, but if we're talking about combating the impact of the built environment.
And so maybe, what are some of the challenges of doing that? Because you're essentially creating a timber alternative.
Exactly.
And I mean, wood is,
Wood is good.
Wood is good. Wood is relatively well known in Indonesia.
Yep.
There's less of it than there used to be for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
And so what are the challenges that you're finding and what are the hurdles that we need to overcome to make that 4-story building in Ubud use less concrete?
Yeah, or Australia.
Or Australia.
Wherever. From 10 plus years of working with bamboo, I find that at a macro level, it's really easy to talk about bamboo. Oh, it's sustainable, it's green, it's fantastic. At a micro level, How do you join two pieces together? How do you stop it from falling apart? How do you stop borer infestation? Oh, I want to use it externally, but the sun seems to dry it out.
How do you fill in the gaps?
How do you fill in the gaps? How do I put a piece of glass into a building made from bamboo?
How do we build a wall?
There's lots of challenges in the implementation of working with bamboo. And it's the same with laminate. It is, in some ways, a timber alternative, but bamboo has very different structural properties to timber. All of its fibers run in one direction, which straight away gives it a different characteristic to timber that's growing, obviously, vertically, radially.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. So what I mean, so maybe I'd be interested to know, like, from what you've been learning, what are some of the biggest weaknesses because a lot of people, and it's not something we talk about at Bamboo as much because we're very focused on round pole construction. But as somebody who started with the round pole and has gone over to the other side, what are some of the main gifts or opportunities you see? And then what are the biggest challenges in terms of in relation to wood, right?
Well, I'll start with, and this is again, sorry, I keep sidetracking every time you ask me a question. I go back a little bit, but 2 steps backwards. Wood is a comparable product, but there's also not enough wood in the world to meet our needs. We have to develop alternative products that can coexist. Again, it's an and. It's not an or.
There's not enough of anything to meet all our needs.
Exactly. There's not enough bamboo. So we always
we're planting. Arif is planting more.
It's planting a lot of bamboo. So it's an or. It's an and, I should say. That said, again, at a micro level, you try to sell someone a piece of laminate bamboo, and they go, "Oh yeah, but that piece of teak is much. I can get for half the price." Well, has that piece of teak come out of a rainforest? Do we, how much teak is there? A lot of questions there. What's the quality of it? Has it been harvested, too young, or is it actually old growth? At which point,
is it really 100 years old?
So there's micro challenges. So there's a lot of micro challenges with laminating bamboo. There's a whole conversation on production, choosing the right species, getting efficiency out of a pole. What parts of a pole can you actually even use?
What do you do with the rest of it?
There's huge wastage involved. How do you create other products so that you're not wasting? Then you take the pole, you process it into a strip. Okay, you have a strip now. Okay, you have to plane it, so all 4 sides need to be perfectly flat. Obviously, unless and if they're not flat, when you come to glue it, there's gaps. So you have larger glue lines, which introduces weakness, which also creates more glue use. So there's a lot of processing issues.
And engineering challenges,
There's engineering challenges. You have to dry the bamboo to the right humidity level before you glue. So there's a lot of quality control involved with it. And that's one of our processes that we're going through is you can do things well, but if you want to do things really well, you got to fine tune every single part of these processes and make sure that you're doing it the best possible way.
Yeah, totally. And so all that stuff is, I think, part of most manufacturing processes,
yes, exactly.
Right? And so assuming all of that
is good,
and you have something you've got a really good bamboo plank. How does it compare? I guess my question is always how do you get it to the market? Because with round pole construction, it's relatively niche as an industry, but the value proposition and the reasons for doing it are relatively clear because you're dealing with already a market of people who are interested in something different. They want something that speaks to something deeper than their basic need for shelter. But with the plank, you're really venturing into the bigger marketplace where people are maybe comparing it to concrete and steel and that good old teak that they shouldn't be using, or even worse, like some other hardwood that was taken down to put the palm oil plantation in. So just out of curiosity, what do you see the larger opportunity? If everything goes well, if you came back in 20 years, what is the plank going to offer that other materials aren't going to offer beyond, sustainability, storing
Yes.
carbon, all that stuff I know is part of it.
So I think from a structural performance point of view, we want it to be as good as a laminate veneer. So LVL timber is kind of our benchmark. So we look at the load values for an LVL beam.
LVL is laminated
veneer lumber.
Lumber. Okay, got it.
So there's various ways of creating engineered timber. And so the whole timber industry has gone through a transformation over the last, let's say, 20 years, where you see the introduction of laminate veneer lumber, cross-laminate timber, so CLT, and now most recently mass timber, which is multi-story construction. And so that creates a roadmap for us. And part of that roadmap is certification. So ISO standard 23478 is a really great reference document for anyone interested in working with laminate bamboo. It was put together by a group of academics, Moso, Bhavna Sharma from the University of Southern California. Various people have all come together and put in their input. And that document has kind of formed the starting point for us to be able to create design guidelines so that anyone can build with laminate bamboo. That said, the benefits of it, I think, probably are largely centered in the environmental to a degree. So I don't think we've really actually fully explored the potential of laminating bamboo, because I think, for instance, it might be more interesting using it for curvilinear forms. But at the moment, we're just interested in standardized rectilinear, buy off the shelf pieces of timber that anyone could pick up and work with tomorrow.
So they could substitute it for a 2x4.
Exactly. One of our products is a 2x4.
Yeah.
Because we want to be able to match those. And so, for instance, if you talk about a piece of 2x4, largely it's made from pine.
Yeah.
Pine, if you buy off the shelf, and as an architect, I have a lot of experience of turning up to a building site, and you see your order of 2x4s, and they're all curving in different directions, and they have a natural bend, and there's all sorts of quality control there that when you start to process and laminate, hopefully and ideally you're actually getting rid of that. So you actually have a more standardized product. And provided you're doing this in the right way, the mechanical properties of that in a much clearer way.
So it's not as standard as they pretend it is.
No, well, it's still, timber is still a natural product, right?
No, yeah,
Sawn
absolutely.
timber.
Yeah.
But then the part that gets really interesting is when we start talking about ideas like carbon banking or restoration buildings. The idea that a building is a carbon sink, it's storing, and also perhaps, and this is something Arif and I are really kind of interested in, is what happens when it becomes an expression of a forest. So, for instance, linking the Indobamboo product with the Bamboo Village initiative and being able to have a building that you can quantify and say, okay, this building has 50 cubic meters of bamboo in it. As a result of that, it has X amount carbon storage. It also has contributed to the restoration of X, acres of land, and has had these impacts at all the way down the value chain. And it's something that is actually fairly achievable right now with current technology. All it takes is just a bit of time and money and energy to quantify these things.
Yeah.
And straight away, it provides a very aspirational vision of where we could be headed towards with the built environment. Obviously, there's going to be lots of market challenges to uptaking this, but it gives some sort of futuring idea of this is actually what the built environment could be. We have the technology through timber and through bamboo where we can quantify ecological positive outcomes through building things.
Yeah, and so how, like, I guess now and in the future is a very different conversation.
Yes.
But how far is the price gap right now?
Not far at all.
So, like, how much? If I was, back to our 2x4.
Yes.
If I'm comparing a bamboo 2x4 with a pine 2x4. Well, the bamboo 2x4 is probably stronger, right, and more dimensionally stable.
Be, yes.
So that's good. It's a better product.
And So, and this is really interesting. Because if you spoke to me about this 6 months ago, I wouldn't have had as clear an answer. But over the last year or so, there's been crazy inflation. In Australia, at least. I know in the US it's gone through as well.
Yeah, everywhere. Yeah.
Everywhere. And what that has actually meant, so at least talking to Australia, the cost of building has essentially doubled. And again, timber is in actually really short supply. So COVID contributed to this. There was a huge disruption in the ability to at least bring materials to Australia. And so you saw that raise material cost, and then it's continued to grow with inflation. And so if I compared our product to a piece of 2x4 for sale in Australia, our product's actually cheaper.
In Bali. And so
all you're adding to that is transport.
It's competitive by the time it gets to Australia.
Yeah, so by the time it gets to Australia, it's competitive, which for me at this stage is kind of all we need. If we can have a competitive product, then, there's not a huge ask you're making in terms of cost sacrifice. And generally, you might actually find it works out to be the same.
And it's stronger.
And so that's where the strength becomes really important. We're doing a lot of R&D right now on maximizing strength, maximizing the mechanical properties so that you can say, yes, this is stronger. And as a result, maybe we can use a smaller volume. So you might not need to buy the larger piece. Instead, you can buy the smaller piece, which then is cheaper.
2x3.
2x3. Well, you want to turn your 4x2 into a 2x4. I know. Wait a second, that's the same thing.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, it's really great to see because, the bamboo as a square beam,
whatever it is,
as a 2x4 is something that we're less interested in Bali, but it's really relevant in the West, and it's we know Europe is in many ways the leader of mass timber because they have a history and a culture of wood already. So and it's happening in different parts of the world. So it's really exciting to see it come to Bali and then hopefully to Australia, and I really hope that it ends up working in the long run because, like you said, on the macro level, it all makes sense, and then on the micro level, there's a whole lot of work to get done in order to make it possible. And I guess my last question is, when you think about a bamboo building, durability is usually at the top of anybody's list if they're interested in doing something serious. How long is it going to last? And we have kind of notional ideas, but we're not like we know exactly how long it's going to last. And if you talk about a wooden building, people don't ask that question because people assume wood buildings are going to last 100 years. But how long will a laminated bamboo building last, and do we know yet?
Well, I mean, it's a good question. We don't know yet because we haven't been around long enough for one to for that time period to elapse. People always ask about durability. And
like they're going to live 100 years anyway.
Well, exactly. And also you have material durability and you have cultural durability. And so our cultural, commercial, social desire to regenerate and have something new means that, again, a piece of steel or a piece of concrete, which should theoretically last for hundreds of years, tends to only last for maybe 15 before they tear that building down and replace it with something else.
Yeah.
So actually, the durability of our materials far exceeds the social capacity for us to keep something and renew it rather than tear it down and build again. That said,
I like to say, unless you're building a church or the parliament, it doesn't necessarily need to last 100 years.
No, exactly. And then that's a whole different conversation.
I'm going
to try and wrap this up rather than start talking about that life cycle. But if we're talking about durability, and part of what we're doing is we want to transform it into something that looks like wood, because I think there is a kind of psychological impulse that if you see a piece of bamboo and it looks so natural, you go, okay, yes, maybe it won't last that long. But I've been in buildings that are over 100 years old made from bamboo. So you can make bamboo last. You just have to build with it in the right way and treat and look after it.
Yeah.
But then by turning it into a 2x4, it does remove that question. And again, if you're using it internally, it should last for 50 years and if not longer, because it's not going to degrade unless something makes it degrade.
Like sunlight or water.
Yeah, which comes back to hats, footings, gumboots, raincoat, walls, protection, and just making sure that you design in the right way. And so durability and design, I think, are intrinsically connected.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks for joining us today, Jed.
No worries.
And if people want to learn more about what you're doing and your work, where's the best place to look for you?
Well, you can check out Cave Urban's website or our Instagram at Cave Urban. Otherwise, the work I'm doing with Indobamboo, check out the website for Indobamboo.
Awesome. Thanks, Jed. We'll put those things in the show notes. And thanks, everybody, for joining us today. And it was great to have you. And it sounds like it's a square peg and a round pole.
They go together. Thanks, Aaron.
Hey, folks. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Bamboo Podcast. And if you're interested in learning more about bamboo, please check out our courses. We have some life-changing in-person as well as online learning opportunities where we will show you how to plant, harvest, process, treat, design, build, and engineer with bamboo. So anybody who's interested in getting into the world of bamboo construction, please check us out. It will help you get closer to your goal of building full-scale bamboo buildings and get you into a really awesome industry that's working not just to figure out how to build better buildings, but also how to solve some of our biggest problems. So check out Bamboo, and thanks again for joining us here on the Bamboo Podcast.